Good morning. Is that all I need to do? It's on? All right.
Should be.
It has been quite a few years since I came and spoke for you. I don't know exactly how many years ago it was, but it was quite a few. I remember Ashley Epperheimer coming up and talking to me afterwards. And now she's grown and married and has a couple kids in Fairbanks. I regard myself as a Fairbanksan. I grew up in Fairbanks. Fairbanks is my favorite place in the world. And I actually recently spent a couple years up in Fairbanks working. And so it was mentioned this morning, the families who have to drive up from Anchor Point on this cold winter day. And normally I'd be like, yes, cold winter day? It's not cold enough. Only I just got back from Florida. And I'm a little bit embarrassed and ashamed of myself, to be honest. Because on these days, I haven't quite gotten it out of myself. Don't worry. I did my quarantine. I got my negative test results back. But I'm still feeling, I took a bike ride for 15 miles biking fast in 90-some degree weather in Florida. So then I come back here. And so if I'm shaken up here a little bit, it's not that I'm nervous. I don't get very nervous speaking anymore, but it's chilly here. It is so good to be with you again. I want to just tell you a story this morning and leave an image in your head. And what I'm challenging this morning is the idea of the gods of American culture that demand our attention and allegiance. And ask yourself, do I bow to them? Do I give them my devotion? Where is my time, my devotion, my allegiance? God gives us 7 beautiful days every week. And what is it that demands our allegiance each day of those 7 days? I thought of a couple things. As I was thinking of this lesson, I thought of the image of a man way up high in a sky rise. I've been up a couple sky rises in big cities. And it's a beautiful thing. Up here in Alaska, maybe some of us think it's the worst sight in the world. But I think it's kind of beautiful when you're visiting, at least. You're up there, 100 stories, whatever. And this man standing up there in a silk suit, in a powerful office, looking down at night over 1 million twinkling lights of the cars and the traffic lights down below him. And he sighs in despair. And I had an image of a very different person. A man on a motorcycle. One of those rough, tough, tattooed, beard flowing, bandana, riding, maybe one of those bars that are like this. And you ask him, what are you searching for? And it's just something new over the next hill, right? And every night, he has to drink himself into oblivion, right? To cover the pain. What are the gods of these men? When you think about freedom, money, power, pursuits of pleasure, so much of that is symbolized in these men, in those images. And then we have this story of Paul and Silas. What do they have? Their rights have been stripped away from them. They're thrown into a cell unjustly. They've been beaten. They're in pain. I can tell you they are in pain. Locked in the cell. And what are they doing? They're singing praise to God. And all the prisoners are listening to them, and I'm guessing that it's not because it's an amazing choir performance. It's because what in the world are two men in those situations doing with joy? Who are their gods? What demands their devotion? Why is this happening? What are the gods of American culture that pull on my life? And have I given allegiance to them or to a truth that transforms? That's the question I want to leave you with this morning. But first, the story. We're going to be in Mark chapter 15. We are in the Roman culture. And in the Roman culture, everything was about power, victory. And every military victory in Rome was understood to mean that our gods are superior to the gods that of the peoples that we have just defeated. Rome overthrew Jerusalem in AD 70, and that was taken to mean that the gods of Rome are stronger than the God of the nation of Israel. And I don't know if you know this, but the Colosseum of Rome, which all of us have seen pictures of, maybe some of you have even been there if you've been fortunate enough to travel internationally. I would love to go there someday. The Colosseum of Rome was built on the spoil of the destruction of the Jewish nation. It is, in effect, you can go and see it, and it stands as a symbol that Rome was saying, our gods are stronger than yours. But even as they built that Colosseum in AD 72, I believe, is when the construction first began, some Romans knew the truth. At least one garrison had witnessed a triumph far greater than anything that Rome had ever put on. And when I say triumph, I'm referring to a specific military celebration. In Rome, a triumph was a parade, a celebration that was given after every military victory. At the beginning of the Roman, of the power of the Roman nation, a triumph was typically given after a general conquered a people and came back, and they threw a celebration of victory for him. They called it a triumph. It was an extravaganza that often took upwards of a week or more to complete. But by the time of the biblical account of Christ, the Roman emperor had been deified to the point where he was essentially accepted to be God on earth. And so the Roman triumph was reserved exclusively for him as a proclamation of his power. This is the representation of the gods on earth. This is their manifestation, their person, and so they honor the Roman god, Caesar, with this celebration called a triumph. I want to take you through what a triumph would have looked like. in the days of Jesus' ministry. Following a great victory, when the generals came home victorious, the emperor would enter the quarters of the Praetorian Guard, his most elite guard. We might say it's kind of like the Secret Service, or maybe SEAL Team 6. These are the elite guys. And there he would congratulate the generals. And there he would honor the guards of the Praetorian Guard by giving them great gifts. These were the elite people that he had to keep loyal to him in order to maintain his power. And then they would acclaim him as their ruler, as their god. They had this great statue of Jupiter, the greatest of their gods. And Jupiter, the statue, was clothed in a purple robe. They would take the purple robe off of the statue, and they would place it on the emperor. And then they would have a crown of laurel, and they would place the crown of laurel on his head. And then a procession was led through the city, with the Praetorian Guard leading, protecting, and acclaiming the clothed Caesar to be Lord. Along the way, incense was burned, and it was so extravagant that in terms of our money today, they say that it would have been the equivalent of millions of dollars worth of incense burned all throughout the city along the route of this procession, as all the people of Rome gathered together to witness this spectacle and to acclaim Caesar is our ruler and our Lord. A sacrifice to the gods accompanied him. In some of the old sculptures that we can find on stone during this procession, they would be leading a bull along with the emperor to be offered as a sacrifice to the gods. And along with the bull, they would have the one who would perform the sacrifice, an executioner with a giant axe. The tool of death to the sacrifice would be carrying alongside the sacrifice. And they would make their way through the city of Rome to the great temple of Jupiter, which was located on what was called Head Hill. And it was so called because legend had it in Rome that as they were excavating to lay the foundation of the temple of Jupiter, a human head was found there in the ground. And so they called it Head Hill, and they erected the temple of Jupiter on the site where they had found this head. And then the emperor would ascend the stairs of the temple, and he would stand there above all the people who were assembled below him. And he would often be flanked by two important people. Sometimes they would be heads of state. Sometimes they would be his own sons, his successors. So it would be men of his choice that represented power in the nation. They were never equals to him, but they would be men that he chose that symbolized his power and his greatness, and they would flank him, one on the one side and one on the other. And there the people would all acclaim him, crying out their allegiance to him as the rightful ruler of the nation of Rome. The emperor was then offered a bowl of fine wine, but he would theatrically reject it, taking it to the altar and pouring it out upon the altar of Jupiter. And history has lost for us the significance of this move. We could speculate, what does this mean? Does this mean that essentially he in his glory is sacrificially giving of himself for the people rather than taking everything for himself? But history and the sculptures that we've found displaying these scenes, we don't really know exactly what this symbol meant. But then the bull was slaughtered upon that altar. And that would bring the triumph to a conclusion. And during the celebrations surrounding the triumph, which could last for days, the Roman people would look to the heavens for a sign that the gods had their stamp of approval upon this celebration and upon this man, the Caesar, as their Lord. And this began when a comet appeared at the funeral of Julius Caesar, who was slaughtered by some of his political opponents, as you may remember from history. During his funeral, a comet appeared in the sky. And this comet was taken to mean that Julius Caesar had ascended into the heavens and was accepted by the gods as one of them. And that gave his successors the divine right to rule the Roman world. And at every triumph thereafter, they would look for a sign in the heavens that would give that would symbolize that stamp of approval of the gods upon this man and upon this event. One time, a flock of geese flew right over as you can imagine the V formation of the geese flying over right as the emperor ascends and stands above the people. And they took that to mean the sign from the heavens that the gods have given their approval to this and to this man. And all this proclaimed that Caesar is Lord and our gods are stronger than any in the world. And our nation has the right to rule the world. And then this proud, powerful nation of violence and glory was confronted by a poor, charismatic Jewish rabbi around AD 30. And there is so much symbolism in the life of Jesus that astounds me every time I search the scriptures. I find new things every time I read the Bible of the symbolism of the life of Christ. You read all through the Old Testament. There's so much. One thing that I discovered a few years ago that I just can't get the wonder of it out of my head is this curse right from the beginning. That one of the items of the curse is that the ground would bring forth thorns. And when Christ was killed and took the curse upon himself and bore our pain, they crowned him with a crown of thorns. He wore the symbol of the curse upon his head. And it was beaten into his head until he bled. He was crowned with a symbol of the curse that he was breaking us free from. There's so much symbolism. But what I'm getting at this morning is one of the symbols that gives me the most awe, because this is a Roman symbol. This is something for these people at this time. That God is going to make a profound declaration that will ring throughout the entire Roman Empire. When Jesus was crucified by the Romans, they threw him a triumph. And it was a mockery. Because Jesus was known as the King of the Jews. When he was on trial in front of Pilate, Pilate asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Because he knew this is what people were saying. And the inscription above Jesus as he was crucified said, "The King of the Jews." And so, to mock that, the cruel battalion of Roman soldiers gathered together and they threw him a triumph, as they would their king, to mock him, to ridicule him. But it turned into something that left them all in awe and fear. Let's begin reading in Mark chapter 15. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things, and Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barnabas. And the crowd came up and asked Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barnabas instead. And Pilate again said to them, Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him!" And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him!" So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barnabas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Pilate did not want to deliver Jesus, but he gives in to the crowd. His soldiers latch onto the title that Pilate says, the King of the Jews. And here the cruelty of the Roman soldiers gives us a most awe-inspiring image. The Roman guard gathers together to ridicule this King of the Jews by throwing a mock triumph. The whole guard comes together. And historians have told us that it is highly unusual that the entire guard would come together. There's many duties to be done. And for some reason that history cannot explain, they all come together for this. Maybe it's something they all need to see. But they all come together. They have a purple robe. And no one would have had a purple robe at that time. It was the sign of power and royalty. Other than Pilate himself would have had one, possibly King Herod. So did Pilate give the robe to take part in this mockery? We don't know, but they have a purple robe. They're pretty serious about it. Let us again consider the story of the triumph of the Roman emperor. And as we rethink about that story, we'll read through the details. Are unbelievable. The triumph would begin as the emperor would enter the Praetorian Guard, where the whole guard was assembled to receive him. Mark 15, verse 16. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole battalion. And they would remove the purple robe from the statue of Jupiter and put it on the emperor and crown him with a crown of laurels. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And as the emperor gave them gifts, the whole guard would salute him. "Hail, Caesar, Lord." And they began to salute him. "Hail, King of the Jews." And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. And then they would lead a procession through the streets. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put on his own clothes, and they led him out to crucify him. And a sacrificial bull would be led alongside the emperor, and a man would be chosen to bear the axe alongside the bull, the instrument of the death, and he would carry that alongside as the sacrifice was led to its doom. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And the procession would wind all through the streets of Rome until they came to the great temple of Jupiter that was standing on what was called Head Hill. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And the emperor would ascend the steps and stand there above the people. And they would offer him a bowl of wine, and he would refuse to drink, pouring it instead upon the altar where the bull would be slain. And then they would slay the sacrifice. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. And then they would proclaim the emperor to be God on earth with a right to rule the Roman world. And assembled before him, as he was lifted up before him, they would pay homage to him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews," and with him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha! You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And this was all a mockery. Do you remember the last part? Here's where it gets to where the Romans didn't expect. They would look to a sign in the heavens that would proclaim to them that the stamp of approval of the gods was upon this event. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he is calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. Think of the Roman centurion standing there. The mockery that he has just executed. And as the time of death draws near, the very sun in the sky is darkened, and all lights go out. And Jesus utters a loud cry. And the Roman centurion knows crucifixion kills when the crucified man can no longer pull himself up for air because he's too weak, and so his lungs fill up with fluid. No crucified man at the point of death would ever have been able to yell out with a loud voice. It couldn't be done. And you remember what Jesus yelled? "It is finished. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And the Roman centurion, who knows he is not at the point of death, looks up. And Jesus dies. And in the darkness of that moment, imagine the eerie stillness. For a moment. Darkness. Stillness. And then rumbling. Rumbling. The whole earth quakes so that rocks are splitting, and the veil inside the temple is torn in two from top to bottom. And when the chaos and the pandemonium stops in the midst of this unearthly darkness, the Roman centurion does what was demanded of him in a triumph. At the end of the triumph, he was to look to Caesar and say, "Caesar is Lord." But this is just a mockery, right? When he sees the manner in which Jesus died. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." And as I close, I want to remind you who this was written to. The Gospel of Mark, most historians believe, was written to a Roman audience. Many years after Jesus died, the book of the Roman Christians received the Gospel of Mark. And they are living in a culture where Roman gods demand absolute allegiance. You cross them, you die. And they are living with a belief that we cannot bow to the gods of Rome because we believe in Jesus Christ as God and Lord. And the Romans, they would be like, "We killed Jesus. Our gods are stronger than yours." And the Roman Christians have to reach that proud culture with a message of Christ as Lord. And the Gospel of Mark arrives for them. And what Mark is saying is, tell the story of the triumph. Rome will understand. Point by point, it is there. And at the moment of death, the centurion, the Roman centurion, understands. This was not a defeat. It was triumph. A triumph unlike anything the world has ever seen before or since. And so where is your allegiance? Is it to the gods of Rome and their fake triumphs? Or is it to Jesus Christ, who had such a triumph that even the Roman centurion who had executed the mockery feared exceedingly and said, "This is the Son of God." What are the gods of America? What are the gods that demand your allegiance? Wealth, power, fame. Knowing this story and the image of the triumph of the true Lord on the cross, we can understand what Paul writes to us in this promise that is given to those who reject the gods of their culture, even if it means ridicule and death, and give allegiance only to Christ. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. But thanks be to God, who in Christ always leads us in triumphal procession, and through us spreads the fragrance of the knowledge of him everywhere. If you know the Roman triumph, that's what he's talking about. We're not the defeated ones. Christ leads us in triumph. Is my allegiance true? There's one thing that I left out. And you need to see this image, and I'll leave you with this image. Did anyone catch the one element of the Roman triumph that I passed over? As he stood upon Head Hill, the emperor would be flanked by powerful heads of state or successors, men of his choosing to represent his power and authority. Who was Jesus flanked by? He was flanked by two in his triumph. Isaiah 53:12 says he was numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. He is flanked by two criminals who deserve to die. The great hope of Jesus' triumph is that we can share it, and yet none of us are worthy. Is there anyone here this morning who feels worthy to stand with Christ in triumph? I'm not. I'm just like those two criminals who were hanged with him. That's where I deserve to be. But Jesus chose to be there. He chose to be flanked by two criminals who deserved to die. And even as he's hanging there, they reviled him for a while. Until one realizes this man's the only hope of the world. And he makes a plea. Lord Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Think about the gods of American culture, the pull that they have on you, the allegiance that they demand. And if you would reject those gods and give your full allegiance to Christ, keep this image in your head as you think about that. That Christ, in his image of triumph, giving his life for the world, with the two men that he chose, on his right and on his left, just criminals, just men who have violated the laws of God just like me. And one of them looked over to him and said, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus, bearing the weight of the world, with every transgression of all history laid upon his shoulders, and pain beyond what we can imagine, screaming in every nerve in his body, looks over to that man and says, tonight, you will be with me in paradise. Where does my allegiance lie? We extend the Lord's invitation at this time.